Welcome to the Deep Dive. Our mission, as always, is to bring you the most critical insights from the absolute flood of security research that's out there. And today we are looking deep into what's being called the zero-day shadow. And this isn't just another story about a data breach. This is a story that frankly confirms what many of us have feared, that some of the most advanced adversaries out there are operating years, not months, but years ahead of us, and they're targeting the very backbone of modern IT. We're talking about VMware ESXi. Now, if you're a learner joining us and that name isn't super familiar, think of it this way. ESXi isn't just an operating system, it's the hypervisor. It's the foundational platform that runs huge chunks of corporate, government, and cloud infrastructure all over the world. It's the brain that lets one physical server act like dozens of virtual ones. So compromising ESXi, that means you control everything. And what we're unpacking today is the forensic work from researchers at Huntress who uncovered this custom-built multi-stage exploit chain. And here's the kicker, the thing that just changes the whole conversation. The threat actors who have been identified as Chinese speaking were likely using 3 critical unknown zero-day vulnerabilities in ESXi for a year or maybe even more, before those flaws were ever publicly disclosed and patched by Broadcom in March of 2025.
Yeah.
This isn't just some opportunistic attack. This is strategic. It's premeditated cyber weapon development that was happening in total darkness.
That 13-month gap you mentioned,
Ah.
that is the absolute core of this. It turns this from just another incident into a mandatory case study for every single security professional listening right now.
Right.
We're not talking about some script kiddie grabbing a known exploit a few weeks after it drops. What we're looking at is the end result of a dedicated professional and, I'm guessing, very well-funded team. A team that found, chained together, and fully weaponized multiple completely unknown flaws.
Right.
So for you, the learner, getting into the specifics here is so important. This is a perfect example of a full professional exploit chain. You see them move from a common entry point laterally across the network, and then they make this incredible vertical jump.
From a guest VM all the way to the hypervisor kernel.
Exactly. The flow is just so precise.
Yeah.
Initial access through, a compromised device on the edge. They pivot using stolen credentials. And only then do they deploy this really specialized toolkit to get the highest possible privilege on the hypervisor itself. So today, we're going to break down the how, the specific vulnerabilities, the exact way they were chained, and just the masterful engineering that went into this custom toolkit that was built for one thing: stealth.
Okay, so let's start there with the objective. Why ESXi? I mean, the sources are clear. The attacker was already deep inside the network. They had a strong foothold.
Yeah.
So why spend what must have been massive resources to break out of the virtual machine they already owned? What makes ESXi the holy grail that justifies burning a zero-day that you've been sitting on for a year?
It's the difference between being a visitor and owning the entire building. It's about achieving fundamental, total, and most importantly, undetectable dominance.
Oh.
Look, if an attacker pops a domain controller, that's bad. They control identities, they control network access. But if they compromise the hypervisor, they control the fabric of reality for that entire environment.
So it's a whole other level.
That's a completely different plane of existence.
Yeah.
Think of it like a data center as a huge library, and every server is a book.
Okay.
If you compromise one server, one VM, you can read that one book. But if you perform a VM escape and you pop the underlying ESX hypervisor, you're not a reader anymore. You are the librarian.
Right. You control the whole collection.
You control everything. You can monitor, you can even delete any single virtual machine running on that hardware. And you get this just unprecedented visibility into every application, every operating system, all the data inside.
And the really critical part, and I think this is what people need to grasp, is that this control is happening at a layer below where most of our security tools are even looking.
That's it, exactly.
Yeah.
That is the goal of a successful VM escape.
Right.
Persistence and stealth, your security tools, your EDR, your antivirus, they all run inside the guest virtual machine.
Right, inside the book.
Inside the book. But the attacker is now the librarian, operating at the hypervisor level. So they're fundamentally invisible to the tools designed to catch them. They can manipulate the guest systems, they can take snapshots of memory, they can inject malicious code, and the security team that's just staring at the guest OC, they see nothing.
Wow.
That ability to persist at that foundational level is why ESXi is the absolute top-tier target for any serious espionage group.
So the motive is crystal clear. Let's talk methodology. Before they unleashed this complex zero-day weapon, they had to get in the door. How did they get that initial toehold?
The initial access vector, and Huntress is very confident on this, was traced back to a compromised sonic wall VPN appliance.
Of course it was, the perimeter.
It's a pattern we see over and over and over again, right? The weakest link isn't some hardened server deep in the data center. It's the box sitting on the edge of the network, exposed to the whole internet.
Right.
The sources detail that the attackers used some kind of flaw or, maybe a misconfiguration in that appliance to get their first foothold. And once they were inside, they didn't waste any time. They immediately went for privilege escalation.
Straight for the keys to the kingdom.
Yep. They got their hands on a domain admin account. Now, it's a little unclear if that came directly from the VPN exploit or if they had to, brute force it or steal it once they had low-level access. But either way, that domain admin account became their launchpad for everything that followed.
So it's interesting. They didn't just immediately burn their incredibly valuable zero-day. They did their homework first.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And that tells you so much about their strategy, their professionalism. This wasn't a smash and grab. They used those domain admin privileges and they used RDP, remote desktop, to just pivot between domain controllers.
Lapping the network.
Methodical internal reconnaissance, establishing control. They were seen staging data, getting it ready for exfiltration. The ESXi exploit was only deployed after all of that, after they had maximized their internal control and were ready to lock in that long-term foundational persistence.
So the zero-day wasn't for getting in, it was for staying in forever.
Precisely. It was far too valuable to waste on just breaking a window. It was reserved for stealing the entire building.
And that initial breach point, the compromised edge device, you mentioned it's a theme. The sources seem to connect this to a much broader problem.
It is a systemic weakness in how we defend networks. The research here references these broader security warnings about 0 days in all kinds of internet-facing perimeter devices. It's not just Sonic Wall.
Right.
We see state actors going after vulnerabilities in Cisco Async OS, which is in their security appliances, or Fortinet FortiOS, their firewalls. I mean, these devices are complex. They're designed to be on the internet, and they represent this single point of failure that when it gets popped, gives an attacker a direct line in.
The irony is just thick. You buy this expensive box to protect you, and it becomes the way in.
It's incredibly ironic. Organizations spend fortunes on these security appliances, but then they don't treat them like critical servers that need constant patching and attention. They just sit there on the edge, collecting vulnerabilities, and they become the perfect front door for these advanced campaigns. This whole case shows that even when your ultimate goal is this insane hypervisor escape, the journey almost always begins with a basic failure in perimeter security.
Okay, so let's summarize where we are. Attacker gets in through a Sonic Wall VPN, steals a domain admin account, uses RDP to move around, maps the whole network, stages data, and only then, when they own the inside, do they play their trump card.
Exactly.
This custom zero-day chain to seize the hypervisor and ensure they can never be kicked out. It's that transition from moving sideways to jumping vertically that we have to break down next. The actual mechanics of the VM escape.
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting.
All right, let's get into the weapon itself. The ability to jump from a guest OS to the ESXi kernel. It's not a single leap. It relies on chaining 3 distinct zero-day vulnerabilities in a sequence.
Yep.
And these 3 flaws, which were eventually disclosed and patched in March 2025, are what researchers are moderately confident were used in this toolkit.
And that chaining mechanism is just a thing of beauty. From an exploitation and engineering perspective, it's really impressive.
So they couldn't just, throw one exploit at the kernel and hope for the best?
No way.
Yeah.
Modern hypervisors have, all these built-in defenses, things like ASLR address, space layout randomization, and sandboxing. To get around those, you need multiple steps. You have to sequentially achieve 3 things.
Okay.
First, you need to do reconnaissance. You need an info leak. Second, you need to corrupt memory and get privileged code execution inside a monitored process. And third, you need that final privilege escalation to actually escape the sandbox and land in the kernel. 1, 2, 3.
So let's take them in order. Step 1, reconnaissance, the info leak.
Okay, so the first vulnerability is CVE 2025-2022-26. This one is an out-of-bounds read vulnerability. It's rated as 7.1, so moderately severe. And it was found inside HGFS.
HGFS, that's the host guest file system, right? Part of VMware tools for sharing files.
Exactly. It's a protocol for moving files between the guest VM and the host. And an out-of-bounds read means the software tries to read data from memory, but it goes past the end of the buffer it was supposed to stay inside.
So it's reading memory it shouldn't have access to? What's it reading?
It's reading memory from a very, very sensitive place, the VMX process.
And the VMX process is what? The manager for that specific VM?
That's a great way to put it. The VMX process, or virtual machine monitor process, is the hypervisor's manager for that one VM. It handles all the resource allocation, the hardware emulation, and it enforces that critical security boundary between the guest OS and the host kernel.
I see. So by leaking memory from VMX, the attacker gets...
They get the map. They get the blueprint they need to defeat defenses like ASLR. They can find out the exact memory addresses of critical hypervisor functions, pointers, the layout of the heap. This data is absolutely essential for crafting the next stages of the attack. Without this info leak, the rest of it would be like trying to hit a moving target in the dark. It'd be totally unreliable.
So they've got the map. Now, step 2 is to actually use that map to get code execution. This must be the really critical flaw.
This is the big one. This is CVE 2025-2022-24. It's rated 9.3 critical. And this flaw is in VMCI, the Virtual Machine Communication Interface.
Another communication channel.
Right. It's designed for high-speed communication between the VM and the host, again, often used by VMware tools. But this specific vulnerability is a toki to you.
A time of check to time of use. A race condition.
Exactly. A race condition. For anyone listening, imagine this. You go to check your bank balance. That's the time of check. The system confirms you have $100. Then in the split second between that check and you actually starting the withdrawal, another process sneakily changes the state of your account.
Okay.
The withdrawal process then goes ahead, the time of use, but it's now operating on faulty information because the underlying state has changed. It thinks it's dealing with $100, but it's not.
And that's what the attacker's doing here, exploiting that tiny gap.
That's exactly it. They exploit that tiny window of time between when the hypervisor checks the integrity of some input and when it actually uses that input. And by doing that, they can trigger an out-of-bounds write.
Which is way worse than an out-of-bounds read.
It's catastrophic. An out-of-bounds write means they can overwrite critical data in the VMX process's memory. And if you can overwrite the right bits of memory, you can achieve code execution as the VMX process. So now they've jumped from just reading data to actively running their own malicious code inside that VMX layer.
So they've officially broken out of the guest OS. They are running code inside the VMX sandbox. But you said VMX is still a sandbox. It's not the kernel yet. They need one final jump.
Correct. The VMX process has really high privileges compared to the guest, but it's still just a process. It's constrained, separated from the ESXi kernel, which is the true brain of the whole system. So they need one more move.
The final maneuver.
And that's facilitated by CVE 2025-2022-25. This is an arbitrary write vulnerability rated an 8.2. Since the attacker is already running code inside the VMX process, thanks to that TOCTOU exploit,
right,
they can now leverage this third vulnerability. And this arbitrary write gives them the mechanism they need to finally bypass the last of the VMX sandbox restrictions. It lets them perform that final crucial privilege escalation to inject and execute their code directly in the ESXi kernel space.
So it's a perfect 1-2-3 punch. The HDFS flaw gives them the map.
Yep.
The VMCI flaw lets them get in the door and start running their code. And that final arbitrary write flaw is the key that opens the door to the master control room, the kernel itself.
That's the synergy. That coordination is what defines this level of attack. And Broadcom basically confirmed it. They said, an attacker with admin rights inside a VM could chain these issues together to escape and get full hypervisor access. It wasn't one single point of failure. It was the precise, coordinated exploitation of 3 complex, independent weaknesses.
It's a powerful argument for defense in depth.
Absolutely, because if the attacker has the resources, they will find and string together every single flaw they can until they get what they want.
Okay, the sophistication here goes way beyond just finding the bugs. Once they figured out the exploit chain, they needed a way to automate it, make it reliable, and then, stay hidden.
Right.
This is when the exploit toolkit comes in. And it really shows an incredible level of professional software engineering.
This toolkit is the tactical weapon system. It's not just some simple script. It's a modular 4-part system that's designed from the ground up for stability, stealth, and persistence. So let's break down the pieces, starting with the brains of the whole thing.
First up, you have MAESTRO. It's the conductor, the main executable, exploit.exe. What does it do to set the stage for this escape?
MAESTRO's job is all about operational success and anti-forensics. It's managing the whole life cycle of the exploit to make sure these really volatile memory operations we just talked about go off without a hitch.
Okay.
Its first critical action is to disable the VMware VMCI devices. Now remember, VMCI is where that super unstable TSE race condition lives.
Right.
So by disabling it before and during the exploit, it likely does two things. First, it ensures that no other legitimate process can interfere with the memory while the exploit is running. It guarantees a clean slate for the memory corruption. And second, it's a form of anti-forensics. It prevents any weird logs or alerts that might get triggered if something tried to access that interface after the exploit was done.
That level of detail, thinking about system stability and covering your tracks, that is just terrifyingly professional.
It absolutely is. So next, MAESTRO loads the actual payload. It's an unsigned driver called mydriver.ss, and it uses something called KDU, a kernel driver utility, to do this.
An unsigned driver. So why is that detail using KDU to load it so important?
It tells us a lot about the attacker's privilege level. In modern operating systems, drivers have to be digitally signed by a trusted authority. It's a core security feature.
To make sure they're legitimate.
Exactly. Bypassing driver signature enforcement is a really big deal. KDU is a known technique used in these kinds of high-privilege attacks to load kernel-level code without a valid signature. So the fact that they could even use KDU successfully means they already had extremely high privileges on the guest OS. They had escalated to a point where they could tell the kernel to accept their foreign malicious code. And finally, MAESTRO is the cleanup crew. After the exploit driver, mydriver.sys, does its thing, MAESTRO monitors it, and then restores the disabled drivers. So the system goes back to looking normal, erasing any immediate evidence of the massive kernel-level manipulation that just happened.
So MAESTRO is the stage manager. It sets up, deploys, cleans up. The actual hard work of the VM escape is handled by that driver, mydriver.sys. I imagine that piece of code has to be incredibly robust.
Mydriver.sys is the brains and the brawn. It's the intelligent payload. Its main job is executing the core VM escape logic, which is, as we said, extremely sensitive to the memory layout of the target.
So it has to know what version of ESX it's running on.
That's the first thing it does. It performs ESXi version detection. VMware is constantly putting out patches and updates, like the ESA 8.0 update 3 mentioned the PDB path. And every time they do, memory structures, function offsets, all that stuff can change.
Yet a poorly written exploit would just crash the system.
It would blue screen the host, yeah.
Yeah.
A total failure. So mydriver.sys dynamically detects the running kernel version, and then it adjusts its memory leak, its corruption routines, and its shellcode addresses on the fly. That ensures it works reliably across a whole range of target versions.
Smart.
After it knows where it is, it executes the routines for the VMX, memory leakage, and corruption. That's the weaponization of the 3 CVEs we discussed. And once it gets execution in the kernel space, it does the final sandbox escape, and most importantly, it deploys the persistent payload, hypervisor backdoor. And this whole sequence, from version check to deploying the backdoor, has to happen in milliseconds.
Wow. So once they've dropped that payload, that backdoor, on the ESXi host, they need a way to talk to it. But they can't just use standard network traffic. That would set off all kinds of alarms.
Exactly.
They need a hidden channel. And this is where VSOCKpuppet comes in. And this, to me, is maybe the most brilliant part of the entire toolkit.
VSOCKpuppet is just a masterclass in using a hypervisor's own native architecture against itself for stealth. It's an ELF executable, which is basically a Linux binary, and it runs directly on the ESXi host, serving as their command and file transfer backdoor.
Okay, but what's the key to its stealth?
The key is that it communicates over VSOCK, virtual socket. VSOCK is a communication mechanism that VMware designed specifically for high-speed communication between a guest VM and the host hypervisor. It's supposed to be for legitimate virtualization functions.
So why is using VSOCK so clever? How does that make them invisible?
Because every single network monitoring tool you can think of, your firewalls, your NDR sensors, your intrusion detection systems, they're all universally designed to look at standard network traffic. TCP/IP, UDP, ICMP. They're watching for suspicious connections leaving the network or moving between VMs.
Right, the stuff on the virtual network card.
Exactly. But VSOCK traffic doesn't use a network card. It's local. It's internal communication happening inside the host machine's memory, routed through the hypervisor kernel itself. So by using VSOCK for their command and control, their C2 traffic is completely invisible to all of those traditional network security tools.
So to an NDR sensor, it just looks like nothing.
It looks like legitimate hypervisor plumbing. It leaves no TCP/IP trace on the network at all. It guarantees stealth against an entire category of security products.
That's incredible. They are literally whispering commands across the hypervisor, and no one on the outside can hear a thing.
It eliminates almost all traditional network forensics for their C2 channel. But of
Yeah.
course, they need a way to send those whispers. They need a client.
And that would be the final piece, the GetShell plugin, which is client.exe.
That's it. Client.exe is a Windows VSOCK client that the attacker runs from inside their compromised guest VM. They use it to connect to and issue commands to the VSOCKpuppet backdoor that's now running on the ESX host.
The whole system is self-contained.
Perfectly self-contained. The initial breach gets them into a guest VM to run client.exe. MAESTRO runs the exploit, which drops VSOCKpuppet onto the host. The attacker then uses the local client to talk to the backdoor using the hypervisor's own internal pipes. And boom, total, quiet, persistent control of the entire virtual infrastructure.
The level of engineering to build all four of those components and make them work together reliably.
It's indicative of a very well-resourced, professional, nation-state level capability. Absolutely.
And that brings us to maybe the most chilling part of this whole discovery. The deep dive into this toolkit didn't just reveal how they did it, it provided hard forensic evidence of when. It proves this zero-day chain was a fully operational weapon long before anyone in the security community knew these flaws even existed.
Yeah.
This isn't just about a failure to patch, this is evidence of a massive, gaping intelligence gap.
And that timeline is confirmed through these little digital breadcrumbs that developers often leave behind in compiled code. They're called PDB paths program database file references. They're basically debugging information, and they show you the exact directory structure on the developer's machine, and sometimes even date stamps.
And what did they find here?
The first and most damning piece of evidence was a PDB path in the main exploit binaries. It referenced a folder named 202402INT. The full path was, well, it was incredibly specific.
Yeah.
Users desktop USXi 821293.
And the Chinese characters in that path, they translate to all full version escape delivery.
Delivery. That one word is so revealing. It's not research or test. Delivery suggests this was a finalized, tested product ready for operational use.
Right, ready to be handed off.
Exactly. And the date, February 19th, 2024. I mean, this was a fully featured cyber weapon specifically targeting a then current version of ESXi, over 13 months before the vulnerabilities were patched in March of 2025. That is undeniable proof of an operational capability that existed in the wild for over a year.
13 months. 13 months of having a silent, God mode level advantage. And there's evidence that some parts of this were in development even earlier.
That's right. A second PDB path, this one embedded in the client.exe binary, the GetShell part, references a folder named 20231102.
So November 2023.
November 2023. The path structure there strongly suggests that the foundational work on the VSOCK communication client and the whole VMCI escape framework probably started then, if not even earlier. This just speaks to the huge investment and the sheer longevity of a project like this. This wasn't a quick sprint. It's a long-term R&D effort that spanned years, focused on one thing, compromising hypervisor technology.
And that strategic long-term approach ties right into Huntress's theory about their whole methodology, the modular approach. Why is that so important? Designing the toolkit this way, separating the exploit from the persistence tools, what's the tactical advantage?
The modular approach is it's the gold standard for any resilient advanced threat actor. The whole idea is decoupling. They deliberately separated the volatile, hard-to-find, version-dependent zero-day exploit components, the CVE chain inside mydriver.sys, from the stable, long-term post-exploitation tools like VSOCKpuppet and GetShell.
Okay, so why do that?
Well, think about the huge amount of resources they must have spent to find those three-chain 0 days. That's a massive investment.
Right.
When Broadcom finally patched them in March 2025, that whole expensive exploit chain instantly became useless. But because the toolkit is modular, the attacker doesn't have to start from scratch.
They just have to replace the one broken part.
Exactly. They only have to replace the payload delivery vehicle, the mydriver.sys file, their C2 infrastructure-VSOCKpuppet and client.exe, which handles all the stealthy communication and persistence. That all remains perfectly functional. That highly engineered, hard-to-detect part is still good to go.
So they future-proof their operation. When the VMCI flaw gets patched, they just go find a new way to get code execution, they update mydriver.sys, and they're right back in business, using the exact same reliable, stealthy C2 channel they already perfected.
It dramatically cuts down on the time and cost to re-weaponize after a patch comes out. It is the absolute definition of a mature, engineering-focused cyber operation that is built for long-term access.
So let's talk about attribution. The PDB paths make that a little clearer.
The source material is highly confident about the origin, mostly because of the linguistic clues. I mean, the build pads have simplified Chinese characters right in them. That folder name, all full version escape delivery. It points, almost unequivocally to a development team in a Chinese-speaking region.
But there was a strange detail, an English language re80 file.
Yeah, and that's the fascinating twist. If this was a purely internal tool for, say, a Chinese state-sponsored group's own use, why would you need an English re-idiom?
Right. Doesn't make sense. So what does that suggest?
The inference is pretty strong. This toolkit was likely developed by a very well-resourced team in a Chinese-speaking region, but potentially with the clear intention to sell it or share it or market it to other threat actors internationally.
So it's an export product.
It could be. The English documentation makes it accessible to a much broader global audience of malicious actors. And that suggests that these top-tier hypervisor zero-day capabilities might be shifting from being exclusively state-sponsored assets into the cyber mercenary market.
Yeah.
And that would significantly widen the pool of who can use these weapons.
Okay, so we've established the what and the how. 3 chain 0 days, a modular toolkit, and it was operating silently for over a year. This kind of threat just completely changes the security calculus for any organization running virtualized infrastructure.
It really does.
It underscores this urgent need to move beyond just reacting to threats we already know about.
I mean, when attackers are demonstrating a 13-month head start, you just can't rely on traditional defensive methods anymore. And it's also important for you, the listener, to understand how confident the researchers are in these findings.
Right.
Hunter says they are moderately confident that this toolkit uses those 3 specific CVEs that Broadcom disclosed. And that confidence comes from what they call the functional fingerprint.
The behavior.
The behavior. The unique operational sequence of using HDFS for the leak, then VMCI for the race condition and execution, and then the shellcode escaping to the kernel. That pattern maps so precisely to the vulnerability disclosures that it's extremely unlikely to be a coincidence.
But they can't be 100% certain.
No, and they are responsible to acknowledge that. They can't be 100% certain it's the exact same compiled code that Broadcom analyzed when they were developing the patch. But based on the technical blueprint of the attack, this is about the highest level of confidence you can have without having the original source code in your hands.
So let me ask a strategic question. We talked about how the attacker already had domain admin. They had RDP access everywhere. They owned the internal network.
Right.
Why risk using these incredibly valuable, high-profile 0 days at all? Couldn't they just persist with domain admin credentials?
That's a fundamental question, and the answer really defines the sophistication of this group. Persistence through a domain admin account is powerful, but it's also discoverable. An internal IT team or an MDR provider can eventually find you, clean the network, revoke that DA access, and you're locked out.
So it's fragile.
It's fragile, but compromising the hypervisor, that gives you persistence at the foundation of reality. They can create new hidden VMs that don't show up in vCenter. They can inject malicious bootloaders. They can persist below the operating system level.
So even if the victim rebuilds everything.
Even if the victim organization completely wipes and rebuilds every single virtual machine and changes every single password in the domain, the attacker can maintain their access because they control the underlying physical layer. It is the ultimate backup plan. It guarantees that long-term undetectable access that is the hallmark of a true espionage campaign.
So given that we are dealing with a threat that operates a year or more ahead of public disclosure, what are the non-negotiable practical steps that organizations need to be taking right now?
Well, the immediate, obvious first step is to apply the latest ESXi security updates. Batch these 3 CVEs. That's just basic hygiene.
Right.
But the real shift has to be in the philosophy of detection. Since we now know what this successful exploit chain looks like, we have to use that knowledge against them.
How so?
Organizations have to proactively deploy the forensic artifacts that researchers have provided. That means using the specific YARA and Sigma rules that security teams have built. These rules hunt for the unique signatures of the toolkit itself. The file names, the weird memory behaviors, the unique strings inside MAESTRO, mydriver.sys, and VSOCKpuppet.
So even if the 0 day is patched, you can still find evidence of a past compromise.
Exactly. Or you can find evidence that the attacker is staging a new tool. Early detection of the attacker's toolkit is really the only viable defense you have against the 0 days you don't know about yet.
And this has to influence how CISOs think about their budgets, right? This can't be about just buying more firewalls.
Nah. Oh, absolutely not. A case like this is the ultimate validation for shifting significant resources toward deep internal visibility. If your adversaries are spending millions of dollars to develop hypervisor escapes, Your security spending has to reflect the depth of that threat.
So where does that money go?
The priority has to shift from more perimeter boxes to things like virtual machine detection and response, or VMDR, and much more robust internal network monitoring. You need tools that can specifically detect that lateral movement using RDP between internal servers. And most critically, you need something that can identify anomalous behavior on internal hypervisor channels like VSOCK.
So you need to be watching the whispers.
You have to watch the whispers. You need behavioral analytics that can flag any unusual traffic on VSOCK, which should really only be used for legitimate known virtualization tasks. If some unknown client suddenly starts talking over VSOCK to your ESXi host, that needs to set off a 5-alarm fire instantly.
It seems like it also makes a strong case for investing in threat intelligence.
A huge case. Relying on public patch announcements is, as we've seen, a year too late. Security teams have to prioritize getting access to intelligence that tracks these APT groups and their tooling, even while those tools are still being tested or sold in private.
This deep dive has really laid bare a cyber weapon of surgical precision, a modular, multi-stage exploit that was in the wild for over a year, giving its creators this just unprecedented advantage against anyone running virtual infrastructure.
It really forces us to ask a much bigger question, I think, about the future of cybersecurity. You look at the evidence, the modular design, the English README file, it all suggests this sophisticated capability is being packaged for wider use. Whether that's for sale on the dark web or for sharing between allied threat groups, the implications are huge.
Right.
If these pre-built VM escape kits, which can compromise the absolute backbone of global infrastructure, if they're becoming accessible commodities, how does that fundamentally change the entire security equation? The knowledge to build this is incredibly rare. It's expensive.
But if that finished product becomes something you can just buy,
If that weaponized knowledge becomes commoditized and easy to deploy, what is the new astronomical cost of defense? And how long can any organization afford to be a year behind attackers who can just go out and purchase a decade's worth of zero-day research?
a truly profound thought on the industrialization of cyber conflict. We appreciate you joining us for this deep dive into the zero-day shadow. Stay vigilant, and we'll catch you on the next deep dive.